The idea that village people are responsible for poverty, bad luck, and pain has been a widely promoted narrative in Nigeria, often reinforced by churches and Nollywood movies. But what if I told you that this belief is nothing more than a myth? For years, many Nigerians have been misled into accepting these notions without questioning their validity. Most of these ideas lack any factual proof. People believe them simply because a prophet or religious figure said so, without subjecting these claims to critical thinking. When asked for evidence, proponents of this belief often argue that some rural dwellers engage in idolatry. However, that alone is not enough proof to conclude that someone in a village is responsible for another person's poverty, especially when those in rural areas are also struggling financially. To debunk this myth, I created this video to provide a clear explanation of why Nigerians, both in urban and rural areas, experience poverty. The real reason behind poverty in Nigeria is the country's political economy framework. Sounds complex. Let me break it down. The political economy framework of a country refers to how its government, economy, and society interact to shape policies, wealth distribution, and development. Simply put, it is the way a government governs its people in economic terms. This framework, not the abundance of natural resources, determines whether a country will be rich or poor. Nigeria is a prime example of this. Despite having vast natural resources, a significant portion of its population remains impoverished. Here are some statistics that highlight the severity of poverty in Nigeria. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, NBS, 133 million Nigerians fall under the trap of multidimensional poverty. A Brookings Institution study using the World Poverty Clock Index reported that Nigeria has overtaken India as the poverty capital of the world. These findings confirm that poverty in Nigeria is deeply structured within its political economy framework, rather than being a result of supernatural forces or a lack of resources. The same flawed political economy framework has also led to a high rate of unemployment. According to the NBS, in 2018, the unemployment rate was 23%. By 2020, it had increased to 33.3%. This upward trend shows that Nigeria's economic situation is deteriorating rather than improving. To understand when things started going wrong, we need to take a brief look at history. The issues began with the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates in 1914, which gave birth to the modern Nigerian state. This merger was not designed for the benefit of ordinary Nigerians but rather to serve the interest of the British colonialists and a few political elites who were used as their proxies. Think about it, how can you forcefully unite two regions with vastly different ethnic, religious, and cultural backgrounds? The inevitable consequence was constant conflict, such as the military coup of 1966, which was later falsely labeled as an Igbo coup. However, modern historical analysis has debunked this claim, revealing the deeper political manipulations at play. In 1963, Nigeria drafted its first indigenous constitution without British interference. This constitution was based on true federalism, unlike the system in place today. It was built on the principle of regionalism, allowing the four regions at the time to develop their economies independently. This structure fostered healthy competition, stimulating economic growth and infrastructure development across the country. However, the 1966 military coup disrupted this progress. What followed was a dark period marked by human rights abuses, political instability, and economic decline, eventually leading to the Nigerian Civil War, 1967 to 1970. Even after the war, Nigeria continued to suffer from tribalism and ethno-religious violence, further hindering development. One of the most telling statements regarding Nigeria's structural inequality came from Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto and first premier of northern Nigeria. He once said, "The new nation called Nigeria should be an estate of our great-grandfather, Othman Dan Fodio. We must ruthlessly prevent a change of power. We use the minorities in the north as willing tools and the south as a conquered territory and never allow them to rule over us and have control over their future." This statement, made even before the 1966 coup, reveals the entrenched power dynamics that have contributed to Nigeria's economic struggles. The 1999 constitution, drafted under a northern-dominated military government, further deepened these inequalities. This constitution has favored the north over the south, despite the fact that most of Nigeria's natural resources are located in the south. The lopsided structure of governance has led to movements like the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, who are advocating for a referendum to break away from Nigeria. Their argument is based on the premise that the North views Nigeria as its own, while the South, despite being the economic powerhouse, remains marginalized. The solution to Nigeria's economic crisis is not poverty alleviation programs or distributing food items during elections. Instead, Nigeria needs a return to true federalism, like the 1963 to 1966 model, where each region controls its economy and resources. A referendum for IPOB and other groups seeking self-determination, allowing people to decide their political and economic future. A restructured political economy framework that fosters an enabling environment for citizens to leverage their talents and education to escape poverty. The belief that village people are responsible for poverty in Nigeria is a distraction from the real issue, a deeply flawed political economy framework. Unless Nigeria addresses these structural problems, poverty will persist, and no amount of prayers, superstitions, or temporary aid programs will change that. It is time for Nigerians to demand real change and push for policies that create sustainable economic opportunities for all. Long ago, in the land of Nduka, there was a hunter named Jide. He was strong and skilled, but he was also lazy. Jide believed that hunting should be easy. He thought that setting traps was enough, and the animals would fall into them without much effort. Every morning, he would go deep into the forest, set his traps, and return home. He rarely sharpened his knives or checked if his traps were still strong. When the sun began to set, he would return to the forest, expecting to find fat animals waiting for him. But most of the time, his traps were empty. Jide grew frustrated. "Why is this happening to me?" he muttered. "Other hunters return with antelopes and bush rats, but my traps remain empty." One morning, after setting his traps, he sat under a big tree to rest. He looked up at the sky and sighed. "It must be the spirit of my village. They do not want me to succeed." He picked up a small stone and threw it at the ground in anger. Just then, an old farmer named Popperdike was passing by with a hoe on his shoulder. He stopped and looked at Jide. "Why do you look so troubled, my son?" Jide sighed again. "Popperdike, I have been setting traps for many days, yet I catch nothing. I am sure my village people are behind this. They do not want me to prosper." The old farmer shook his head and chuckled. "Have you checked your traps properly?" Jide frowned. "Why should I? I set them every day. They should work." Popperdike smiled. "My son, when my crops do not grow, I do not blame spirits. I check my soil, I remove the weeds, and I plant fresh seeds. You must do the same." Jide ignored him. He was convinced that unseen forces were blocking his success. He went home and told his wife, Neka, about his problem. "The spirits are fighting me," he complained. Neka, who was wiser than Jide, asked, "Have you checked your traps?" Jide rolled his eyes. "You sound like Popperdike. I do not need to check them. My problem is spiritual, not physical." Days passed, and Jide still caught nothing. His anger grew. "It is the village elders. They have cursed me," he shouted. One day, a young boy named Ife, the son of Popperdike, was walking through the forest to fetch firewood. He saw Jide sitting under a tree, complaining to himself. "What is wrong, Uncle Jide?" Ife asked. Jide sighed. "I have been hunting for weeks, but my traps are empty. Someone from my village is stopping my success." Ife thought for a moment and said, "Let me check your traps." Jide laughed. "What can a small boy like you do?" But Ife insisted. "Let us just look." Reluctantly, Jide followed the boy. When they reached the traps, Ife knelt down and inspected them. Then, he burst into laughter. "What is so funny?" Jide asked. "Uncle, look at these ropes. They are old and weak. The animals you are trying to catch must have escaped easily." Jide's eyes widened. He bent down and looked closely at his straps for the first time in weeks. The ropes were indeed weak and frayed. The sticks holding them together had also loosened. No wonder he had caught nothing. So it is not my village people? Jide asked in surprise. Ife shook his head. No, uncle. You need stronger traps. Look at my father's farm. When his crops do not grow well, he does not blame spirits. He works harder. That is why we always have food to eat. Jide felt ashamed. He had wasted weeks blaming unseen enemies instead of fixing the real problem. That evening, he went to the market and bought new, strong ropes. He repaired all his traps and set them carefully. The next morning, he rushed to the forest. To his joy, he found 3 fat antelopes caught in his traps. Jide smiled to himself. All this time, I was blaming others, when I was the one who refused to do the right thing. From that day on, Jide worked harder and never blamed unseen forces for his problems again. Blaming others for our struggles does not bring success. Just like Jide, many Nigerians blame village people for poverty, when the real problem is a broken system. If we want change, we must fix the system and work hard, instead of waiting for miracles.